Hello and welcome to the Raptors Show on the Sportsnet Radio Network. Make sure you find the Raptors Show wherever you listen to podcasts and subscribe, and please rate and review the show. A reminder, we're streaming live on Sportsnet's YouTube channel and airing live on Sportsnet 360, Monday to Friday from 2 to 3 p.m. I'm your host, William Wu, and I am joined, as always, every Tuesday by Blake Murphy.
Blake Murphy.
What's going on, Blake? Today, when you hit me up this morning, shortly before I woke up, about what our topics were going to be.
You slept in.
Oh, come on, man! You gotta get in your rest when the Raptors are playing the West Coast. But you hit me up. What are the topics? I sent you the topics. And usually, what I like to do is talk about the basketball on the court first, and then we talk about the stuff off court.
However, this time of year, baby.
Not this time of year. You're right. Because, look, right now, all anyone is talking about is OG Anunoby, who has, I guess, officially been thrust into trade rumors. This one from Shams Charania. The report dropped today. We have the clip here of the report that the Raptors are now actively listening on trade rumors or trade offers for OG Anunoby.
So the Raptors are taking calls on OG Anunoby. You look at the Knicks; they're willing to give up multiple first-round picks for OG Anunoby. But another team in the last week or so that's emerged is the Phoenix Suns. I think they're a team that they have the assets, 8 first-round draft picks at their disposal between now and 2030. They've got the picks. They've got players. They've got guys like Cam Johnson. You have expiring contracts like Dario Saric, Jay Crowder. Can you put together a package for OG Anunoby? Could you go get something for a Jay Crowder that can kind of replenish your bench? I think those are really the two pathways right now for the Suns. I think the point guard search probably looks more into the summertime because right now the need is more at the wing. They've got CP, they've got Book, they've got Ayton. And I think with Devin Booker, the good news is they have treaded water for the most part. They've won 6 of 7 without Devin Booker. He's doing more and more. He's doing everything right now besides 5-on-5. So the Suns do believe that he's getting closer to making a return. And the way he's played, how good he's been, I do think he has the ability to take this team from what they are now, which is a fringe playoff team, to a contender.
Okay, so lots of breakdown from that Shams report. First and foremost, the Raptors are taking calls on OG Anunoby. This is, I guess, not that much of a surprise. I mean, the Raptors are clearly in a position where they're looking at this road trip to sort of decide what they're going to do with the team. And that's not to say that Masai and Bobby watched the game last night and they're like, wow, I can't believe the Raptors blew another fourth quarter lead. We got to trade OG now. But I do think that it was more likely the Raptors would pivot towards selling at the deadline. Now, of course, this doesn't necessarily mean that they would find a deal that they like. And, of course, the Raptors, I think, hold the cards here because they have the player that it seems like a lot of teams in the league want. I guess I want to start with your reaction. Are you surprised?
Not really, because I think where the Raptors are both this season and in terms of what they're building and where they're going, they're in a position where, short of Scotty Barnes, they should be listening on anyone.
Okay. And
this team, even if you believe in the core 6 or so being able to be better than this next year into the future, you're not good enough that, being able to say, nah, we're sitting this out, we're not listening, that's a luxury of very good teams who have the pieces in place or at least know what the missing pieces are to take them to that next step and how they're going to get there. This is probably, if there's anything surprising about this, this is by far the leakiest season we've had with the Raptors. Yep. I would imagine during the DeMar Kyle era, they were listening on DeMar and Kyle and Terrence Ross and JV and whoever else because they weren't in a position where you were certain. And in fact, you would probably, with the exception of 2018, before they fell flat on their face and their spirits broke after the tips didn't go in game 1 against Cleveland, that's the only time they could have reasonably been like, no, we're headed in the right direction. We've got the pieces we need. You have to listen. The Raptors are in a particularly poignant spot with that because Fred and Gary are 2 of the core 5 or 6, however you want to frame it, and you have to make a decision on them more immediately. Now, when you have it out there that you're listening on guys like that, of course teams are going to be like, well, what about OG? No disrespect to Gary Trent Jr., who's a very good three-point shooter. A lot of teams need that kind of offense. If I'm calling the Raptors and I ask what the price on Gary Trent is, I'm also going to ask, hey, so how much more would it take to get OG instead? Because OG's a superior defender, a little more plug and play, doesn't need the ball in his hands very much. Now, some teams might be constructed where Gary makes a bigger impact because they need that scoring or whatever. Most teams, though, and most lineups around the league, OG at his price tag with his skill set is as plug and play as it gets. So I think that's why you're hearing the Raptors are listening, because they're not hanging up the phone immediately. You know, I'd be a little surprised if we heard that there were talks about Pascal, just because he's got a year left, and you know, we haven't heard anything about that. It's very hard to trade a max guy in season. Precious, just because he's just restoring his value now and he's got rookie scale left, and Scotty Barnes because it's Scotty Barnes. Anyone else, I would hope the Raptors are listening on and at least figuring out what the market is, whether that's because you want to turn around and tell the Knicks, hey, we can get 3 firsts somewhere else for OG, but we'll give you Gary for 2 firsts or something like that. Or you just want to gauge how much the teams around the league value your guys, because the Raptors know how good these guys are and can be, but it tells you something if you have a whole bunch of guys that other teams are, and I don't know that this is actually the case, but the reporting has been pretty consistent that if the Raptors put Fred, Gary, OG on the block, they would get a lot back for them. Maybe that informs what the front office is doing, because it tells them the path to replacing those guys, if you do deal them, is really difficult.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of reasons you would be listening. If I'm a playoff team right now, I am calling about OG Anunoby. I'm calling about Gary Trent and Fred VanVleet and a couple other pieces too. But most contending teams, most teams that feel like they're a piece away, OG is the most seamless piece to pluck from one situation, drop into another. Like, is there a lineup in the league you don't think he would be able to be OG in? Probably not, right?
Yeah, no, I've said this in the show previously, but I do think a lot of teams in this league are one OG Anunoby away from true championship contention. And that's not to say that he is going to be like a number 1 or number 2 or even number 3 option in most of these contending teams. But for his exact skill set, that's exactly what every team is looking for. And this is why you've seen already a lot of teams known to be in the mix, right? So Shams has now put it out there that Phoenix is now known to be in the mix, right? And you know, we can talk about sort of what Phoenix could potentially offer in some sort of return like that. The New York Knicks have been, you know, mentioned quite a few times over the last few weeks about how they have thrown 3 first-round picks into the mix. The Portland Trailblazers last year at the deadline, or last year at the draft, was very clear that they were in and they wanted something on OG Anunoby. It's pretty clear that Dame wanted to play with OG as well, which is a huge factor in that sense. And I think the deal that was reported, which ultimately didn't actually happen, mostly because I think the Raptors turned it down, was I think it was a 7th pick and Josh Hart. Right. And that was the name there. Of course, you can extend that out. There are other teams that could potentially be interested that make kind of a lot of sense. For example, the Pelicans, for example, the Grizzlies. But among those 3 known teams, okay, let me just take the Knicks first off, because I don't know, for me, like, there's one identifiable prospect on their roster that really satisfies what I
do
would
like
look
Grimes,
for.
but not at that level, right? Like,
Yeah.
he's mini OG for a reason. Because he's not OG.
I wouldn't even go that far, to be honest.
He's getting pretty good defensively, though.
I don't know, man. Fred averaged 30 against him this year.
Okay, but that's just because Fred loves playing against Jalen Brunson, apparently.
I mean, Grimes got a lot of that matchup. But Suns, Blazers, I would assume maybe Blazers are right now currently just the way their season is sliding. Maybe they don't push in that direction. But what could the Suns offer that would make you feel more comfortable with sort of, you know, letting go of OG Anunoby?
Well, the Suns are an interesting one because, and I don't mean to correct Shams, they have 7 picks that they can deal, not 8. You can only trade picks 7 years out, and you can't trade them in consecutive future years. So you have 4 first-round picks effectively that you could include in a deal. They do have all their second-round picks as well. Nothing extra incoming. The Suns are interesting because depending on what the Raptors want, and they're an interesting Gary Trent or Fred VanVleet destination for this reason too.
Sure.
They have a bunch of those mid-tier salaries. So it's pretty easy to construct, if you fire up your trade machine of choice, pretty easy to structure a Suns deal that either includes one kind of bad contract or a bunch of filler contracts that you wouldn't care about the players, or something in between like a Landry Shamet where it's like, hey, it's not the greatest contract in the world, but 3 more years of Landry Shamet around 9 or 10 million, like that's a useful thing to have around. But the picks are the big one there. The tough part is with the Suns changing ownership, they're in the process of that, with Chris Paul being where he is contractually, where next year the Suns could get out of like half of that deal if they wanted to, and then get out of the 3rd year entirely. The timing of a Suns pick is what gets curious to me, not because it wouldn't be valuable. I mean, in this year, if they were willing to give you an unprotected pick, you might even, fade them a little bit and be like, yeah, unprotected first this year. And you're basically making a bet that the Suns will be one of the teams that slides out of the play-in bracket.
That seems unlikely when Booker comes back.
It does seem unlikely. They're up to 7th now, and I think they're, if you look at these teams on merit, they're better than, Minnesota, Utah, Portland, the other teams that are in there.
Mm-hmm.
I'm saying, though, that is something you could do, or you could look at the Chris Paul situation, a bit of an ugly cap set up there, and you look, hey, maybe a 2024 lightly protected pick is a really nice asset or something like that. So they're interesting for that reason. They're also interesting if you want to loop in a third team and send Jay Crowder somewhere that helps make the math work. And, we heard the Bucks were willing to, I think this was Shams as well, that the Bucks would be willing to, here's a bunch of salary filler that doesn't move the needle for you.
Like George Hill.
But also a couple
Serge.
seconds.
Yeah.
And
then Jordan Noir, I think, was the one like more tangible prospect.
So maybe this is a scenario where the Raptors are getting back Landry Shamet and Cam Johnson and Jordan Noir, and none of those guys individually moves the needle for you. But then you're looking and it's like, well, okay, you also got a first from the Suns, 2 seconds from the Bucks for facilitating, and then the whole package is not really sexy. But like, this is a team that has not had a pipeline of assets coming in because they traded so much to make the championship season happen that suddenly you have a couple other young guys, you have a couple extra picks you can trade around. None of that stuff is as good as OG Anunoby, but if you become resigned to trading him, you can get to interesting deals with the Suns.
Speaking about the Suns in particular, is bringing back Ayton as one of the centerpieces of the deal something that appeals to you or not?
You watched last night's game? Is the worst 23-13 I've ever seen.
Okay.
Or 22-13, whatever he ended up with. No, the Ayton thing is, I don't love it. I'm fine with Ayton. Like, I think he's a guy I like rooting for on another team.
He's a consistent like 18 and 10.
Yeah, and he'd probably average like 15 rebounds a game on this team that can't rebound very well.
Yeah.
4 years and $133 million is a lot for a guy who is, first of all, defensively, and maybe this is a good thing, but you'd have to change what you do defensively at least a little bit.
A lot of drop coverage.
Yeah, he's not that fleet of foot. And look, this team could use someone like that, but I don't know that they need someone like that at like $33 million a year, $35 million a year past this year. You also, he's a guy that if you're trading away Fred VanVleet, maybe makes a little less sense because he needs to eat in the pick and roll.
Right.
That's where a lot of his offense comes from. I know he tried to seal a couple Raptors guys really early in possessions last night, and he was fairly effective like that. Most opponents aren't going to have like 6'8" guys covering DeAndre Ayton, right? Like that's something that's not entirely unique to the Raptors, but fairly unique. And Scotty Barnes did like a pretty good job keeping him out of his spots or forcing turnovers. So I don't think that this team would want to run a ton of post offense through him. And if you trade away Fred VanVleet, even if you trust Pascal Siakam and Scotty Barnes as kind of lead ball handlers, which you probably should at this point, they don't have a natural like pick and roll operator to take advantage of Ayton. So I'm a little like, if Ayton had signed a 4-year, $100 million deal last offseason, this becomes an easier discussion.
Right.
Him at the max, like that contract is not very nice.
Okay, that's fair. I thought it's worth asking because Phoenix has dangled Ayton out there repeatedly.
Yeah. And
they were like very regrettably like, fine, we will give you this contract, but only because we have to.
I think, back to my earlier point about like maybe you want to talk to teams about trades because you want to gauge what the value of guys is. Well, DeAndre Ayton is a guy who sat out there available in RFA last year, and the only team that tried to poach him was the Pacers, who have so much cap space still that they were able to give Miles Turner an in-season bag. That never happened. Right. Hey, here's $17 million written on a check so that we can extend you as a tradable asset for 2 years. Like, that's how much cap space the Pacers had. They weren't doing that, I don't think, because they love DeAndre Ayton. They were doing that because, here, anyone who will take our cap space and can become an asset for us, come, like let's talk. And then it wasn't until that point that the Suns matched on him. And it was
Right.
probably because, like, I'd guess James Jones would tell you in secret that they didn't want to give him that money either, which is why it didn't get done earlier. But they couldn't afford to lose him for nothing while you're still in this Chris Paul, Devin Booker, Mikal Bridges moment.
Right. So yeah, the other teams potentially in the mix. I mean, the Grizzlies, the Pelicans, those are more like, we haven't heard a specific direct link, but they make sense on paper in the sense that those teams can definitely use an OG Anunoby. Those teams are definitely looking to make the next push and be not just playoff teams, but like win a round, maybe win 2-3 rounds. You know, they also have the type of prospects and pieces that would maybe appeal to you more. When you're looking at those teams, are there more players or picks that appeal to you more than as compared to making a deal work with Phoenix?
Well, glad you asked.
Yes.
So remember last week when we were prepping for the show and you were like, yeah, you sent me a couple questions. You were like, who has the best assets or whatever. Well, I give you this giant spreadsheet now that I actually tweeted it out earlier so everyone can access it and use it as they see fit. But it has all the extra picks and outbound picks that every team has, their tax status, so you know how much they can take in or might want to shed, and then all of their contracts broken down into expirings, rookie deals, and vet deals. So through this, you know, you can get a little bit of a visualization of, like, it's not surprising Oklahoma City has like a really long part because they have 18 extra picks and 5 pick swaps because they're insane. But through doing this, you do notice, maybe surprisingly, hey, the Knicks look pretty interesting. Like, look at all these extra picks the Knicks have. Look at all these reasonably small rookie or second contracts and a couple expirings to help make things work. Memphis is probably the most interesting because they can kind of hit that middle ground of interesting prospects and extra picks, which is, I think, if you were thinking of, you know, if the Raptors aren't going to do a full teardown, what do they want? Well, they want a rotation piece back that can help as soon as next year because you don't have a ton of cap space, and you want extra picks to kind of restock the cupboard, but you'd like them a little nearer term. That's stuff that the Grizzlies can do for you. They have a lot of guys still on rookie deals. They have a big expiring in Danny Green that helps make trade math work. And they have mostly their extra picks are extra seconds, but they do have a 2024 Golden State first that is only top 4 protected and becomes unprotected by 2026. So if you wanted to fade the post Draymond Warriors era, maybe the post Bob Myers Warriors era, based on other reporting from The Athletic recently, that is one of the more interesting trade chips in the market. And then Memphis has almost all of their own picks as well. So they're a very interesting team. New Orleans is one that 2 weeks ago I would have said they were a really interesting trade partner. Now I'm not sure if they're incredibly interesting because they're free falling and might get desperate, or if they are going to be like, you know what, we're not there yet. Let's not put all our stuff in, because they have 3 extra firsts that are very lightly protected. 2024 unprotected first for the Lakers, 2025 top 4 protected first from the Bucks. Still in Giannis's window. That's probably not great. But 2027 Milwaukee first unprotected. That could potentially be something. And then, of course, they have a bunch of pick swaps with the Lakers and the Bucks that they could offer up. And then they have a handful of interesting guys on rookie deals like Dyson Daniels. Kira Lewis did not acquit himself well against the 905 the other week. Like,
not really.
You got my brother Trey Murphy, Najee Marshall. There's just a lot there. They're not moving Herb Jones, but you could at least ask. They got OG at home. They got Herb Jones.
I guess they have OG at home, although I don't know. OG definitely shoots way better.
So I would say those are the 3 teams that, whether we're talking Gary, Fred, or OG, Memphis, New Orleans, and New York are probably the teams that have the most interesting mix of extra picks / financial flexibility / the types of contracts on their books that make a few different deal frameworks possible.
I was just thinking about this too. Like, obviously, tons of teams are going to jump into the mix. If there's one team that surprises and jumps into the mix, if there's like a dark horse that maybe jumps in this OG thing, I'm looking at it like, why wouldn't Indiana maybe hop on this? You know?
No, you're just still looking at that OG whispering to Tyrese Halliburton.
No. I'm just thinking about, like, that's a team that has a lot of talented guards. That's a lot of talented players. And I think for me, if they want to take that next step, they definitely need a guy like that, especially if you're going to do anything in the playoffs in the Eastern Conference when it's all dominated by big wings.
And here's the other thing is like with a team like Indiana, and yeah, OG's got roots there from college. It makes sense. But if you're a team like the Pacers and you're looking at, well, what team should be willing to take risks on guys who could potentially leave in free agency, but whose bird rights might be really valuable, right? Or who might be willing to OG's extension eligible in October. You look at the Pacers cap sheet, you look at the Pacers history of landing free agents. Are they going to quibble over a couple extra bucks to extend OG on a deal he's comfortable with if they trade assets for him? I don't think so. I think that's one of the likeliest places he could. He's not extension eligible yet, but like you walk in the door and the first conversation you have is Clutch calling the Pacers up and being like, all right, let's start the framework on something for October. You traded assets for him. He wants to be here. Let's go. And then OG has not only the landing spot where there'll be a little bit more offensive opportunity, but a landing spot where he could potentially be back in the playoffs shortly. And they'd have a real willingness to probably not max him, but like pay him a hefty raise off his current deal when that becomes possible in October.
Yeah. Okay, so we talked about it from the, what the Raptors could receive. I also want to think about it from the Raptors' perspective themselves, because it does feel like a pretty significant shift, right? It always very much felt like OG was a core piece, always spoken about in that way. Clearly, Masai is very fond of him as well. And of course, like, look, this is business, like things can change. But I do wonder, like, what has changed? Now, is it just because the Raptors are losing that they're kind of moving on this direction? Is it that he might potentially want out? Is it sort of like the price is right at the current moment just because it seems like he's the hottest name in the market? Like, why?
Yeah, I think it's more of that. His name is hot right now. And I think the combination of it's not a secret that over the years, OG Anunoby has felt that he could do a little bit more offensive role-wise. And we've seen, you and I talked a lot last season about how he got those windows and wasn't super effective in them, and then became super effective again when he went back to a more OG Anunoby-ish role.
Yep.
Now, this year, he's kind of split the difference. He's been a little more efficient in a little higher usage role, but still, we're not seeing like the dribble drive stuff. We're not seeing any of the in-between stuff. Like, he's a very good finisher and he's a good three-point shooter. And then right now, that's about it. So he still looks mostly like a play finisher. Now, how much he feels he hasn't been given full opportunity to develop those skills versus how much we're 6 years in and maybe it's just not coming. Like, last night, it was pretty striking. I would say that OG is better than Mikal Bridges by a narrow margin, but Mikal Bridges' ball handling and ability to create for himself and others like stood out in contrast for that role type.
He also plays every game, which is a very significant asset.
Yeah.
Right, comparatively.
But we've heard, as far back as Nick Nurse's book, hey, OG had some role frustrations in the 2018-2019 season, which was his sophomore season. At that point, we've heard that, last offseason there were a bunch of rumblings and, however valid or not valid, that OG wanted a larger role. And again, you and I have talked about how you want your guys to be hungry like that, right? Like, you want your guys putting in the work and being like, I can do more, I'm capable of more, I want more for myself. Culturally, organizationally, it's healthy to have guys hungry like that. And we can talk about usage percentages and stuff like that. The reality is when you play guys 36 minutes a game, they get a lot of field goal attempts.
Yeah.
OG's field goal attempts are down a little under one field goal attempt per game from last year, but he's still averaging 17. I would say his efficiency's gone up, but his ability to create for others has maybe gone down a little bit this year. Anyway, the combination of those things having been out there, his role not growing this year, and I think a lot of this, honestly, is the buzzards are hovering. Like, other teams are going to kick the tires on guys. And I'm not saying that every OG Anunoby leak or every Fred VanVleet leak comes from a team that would like to acquire them and is trying to put that out there to cause further disruption and see what shakes loose. But I do think this time of year, there are a lot of executives and a lot of news breakers having conversations. And all sides of this is like OG's going to come up a lot. He's until the Raptors, like, okay, so let's say the Raptors record were 8 games better. What would you and I be doing today? We'd be going through the standings. We'd be
like, hey, how much would it take to get Jakob Poeltl? My least favorite topic on the show.
But what we do is we would go through the standings and we would click the teams that are underperforming are probably going to be sellers. We'd look at who only has 1 or 2 years left on their contract, who is affordable to bring in, and whose role fits. And if you are any other team, like any of the 20 teams in a playoff spot right now, and you're doing the same exercise on the Timberwolves show or the Suns show or whatever, of course, OG Anunoby's at the top of your list. And then you're going to ask people about him. And then the newsbreakers are going to ask about him. Right. And other GMs are going to ask the Shams and Woj and Jake Fishers of the world about it. That's how this cycle goes at this time of year. So I don't think the OG stuff is like necessarily that this is imminent. I think it's that the Raptors are in a weird spot. And as they've left the window open for people to speculate on their direction, OG is just a really attractive target.
Yeah, no, fair enough.
Look, let me just put it on the record. Like, I think moving OG Anunoby for something other than like a really incredible haul, like unless you're getting like 2 unprotected firsts or like 3 picks with at least one of them kind of a blue chip pick, you are, unless you're doing a full teardown, which then includes dealing Fred, looking at a Pascal deal in the offseason, stuff like that, you are not going to find a 25-year-old on an affordable deal who produces at both ends the way OG Anunoby does. Like, those guys don't exist. Like, there's a reason Robert Covington gets traded every year, and it's because at one point Robert Covington was quite good, but like everyone talks themselves into needing a Robert Covington, or a Bridges or an Anunoby. Like, this is a really important player type if you are going to be competitive. If you're 6 games under 500 and leaning into a tank, yeah, maybe not. Maybe he doesn't move the needle for you all that much. But if this Raptors team intends to be competitive again next year, it's hard for me to see an OG Anunoby trade unless it's one where it's just like, wow, Masai wins a blockbuster trade so dramatically because someone gets desperate by next Thursday. It's hard to see an OG trade making you better by next season. So I'm not in a rush to do it. He's going to have trade value in the offseason too if you really don't think it's tenable at the end of this year.
No, this is why, from a negotiation standpoint, Masai is holding all the cards. You have, I don't know, man. I got to imagine 8 to 10 teams interested, maybe 5 or 6 seriously interested. Teams, you have the offers already made and put on the table in certain cases. You have the fact that you don't have the urgent need to trade him right now. You can still, as you mentioned, trade him in the offseason. You have the fact that his contract is right now very amenable to many teams, and his skill set is great. He has the potential upside as well, which, I suppose if he goes to a different team and scales up his offensive production, maybe he, can show that he can get to that 20-point plateau. But, I think right now for the Raptors, though, it does seem like they are heading in that direction. I know the report is just at listening to calls, but even this, I thought that was interesting because pregame yesterday, Nick Nurse was asked about the fact that, OG Anunoby was ruled out for the rest of the road trip with the sprained wrist. We saw him take a very hard fall against Golden State.
No, that was fake. That was just the Raptors shutting him down for a trade. He didn't actually fall on his wrist. They just, we at Sportsnet inserted that clip in there. It wasn't real.
Okay, well,
false flag. Realize.
That makes sense. Clearly, we own the team, so therefore, we're in conjunction with it. But this was Nick's answer when he was asked about the news that OG Anunoby would be ruled out for the remainder of the road trip.
It's a little surprising to me that it's going to be. This trip's got a long way to go yet. Not like this trip's ending around the corner, right? So it's a little surprising to me, but I guess that's what we know. What we have now for this trip, and we go probably. I think Delano's going to be good to go.
Yeah. What do you think Nick really wanted to say there?
I think Nick was watching Jacques Vaughn's Ben Simmons presser the other day and was just trying to do his own version of it. Did you see that one?
No.
The Jacques Vaughn gets asked about Ben Simmons needing rest with knee soreness, and he was like very specific that I forget who the other player was. Maybe it was Kessler Edwards, but he's like, that's a knee contusion. Something happened and he banged his knee. He's out for that reason. Ben is out with knee soreness.
Okay.
And he was very clear to draw that distinction. And then he went in, then he kept going on about how well, we're on a back-to-back and everyone played the same amount of minutes. And I appreciate the preparation that those guys who could play those minutes still put in.
Okay, yeah.
Maybe a little bit of frustration at OG's, inability to stay healthy over the years. Maybe Nick was just trying to speak earnestly that he's a little surprised. But it's I don't know. It looked like a pretty bad wrist sprain, bad enough that he went for X-rays and MRIs. Is it all that surprising that he's out like 5 more days? It's not. I don't know if Nurse thought that it was the start of the road trip or what, but like this road trip's over in 5 days. It's not. Oh, what day is today? 6 days.
6 days.
Yeah. I don't. Blake Murphy Tuesday is the only way that I could keep track of the calendar.
I mean, he doesn't have to say that he's surprised, I suppose. You know, you could just say, like, hey, listen, the MRI results came back and we thought this is the safest course of action.
Right.
Very easy
but
to
it's
do.
been a frustrating season for him too, right?
Yeah.
So
No,
I think
that's why it was interesting, man. That's interesting. Like, again, it's one of those things where it's like, well, you know, I think Nick is clearly trying to win every game, which we will cover in the second half because I thought it was a good game last night. I would love to talk about basketball as well, but of course, this is, you know, what the show demands at the moment. But yeah, I mean, yeah, if you had OG available last night, probably wouldn't have happened anyway. But if you had OG available last night, you'd win the game.
Yeah,
Like,
absolutely.
you know,
Well, this is the thing. We're not talking about OG Anunoby, and Shams isn't reporting about OG Anunoby because he's not good. It's quite the opposite. Mr. Two Phones over here, right?
Yeah, man. Me and Bobby on the same tip. You know what I mean? Just yeah. Anyway,
you, Bobby, Kevin Gates. You got to do the Bobby thing with the 2 up to the ear at the same time.
Oh, yeah, the double?
Yeah.
That's excessive. That's really like, hey, GM's calling me on either line. My last question on this with OG before we actually take the break and talk about the game that happened last night. Yeah, if OG does move on, is there someone in the Raptors roster right now that gets promoted into the starting group in his place? Because
Precious just stays there.
Okay. That's it?
He's been playing really well.
Okay. Are you happy with that? Like, is that something that you could see as obviously that short term, that's exactly what's going to happen. I agree with you. Long term, is that something that you could see as a fit? Is the lineup more balanced potentially?
Yeah, I mean, I just, it's a hard question to answer, not to like wishy-wash on it, but like if OG is dealt, I'll be extra surprised if that's the only trade made.
Okay.
It doesn't seem like a trade that makes a lot of sense in isolation.
Okay.
So
you still think
I
one
would
of Gary
expect
or
I would
Fred?
expect more to come. Yeah. Because like if you're not moving those guys, again, that means you're trying to compete next year, and OG is going to help you do that more than deep future picks or a guy who's not that yet. You know?
Yeah, you're right. Some of these picks that we're talking about, we're really trading them for someone right now in grade 7 is potentially getting traded for OG Anunoby.
Look, Scoot's playing on All-Star Weekend. If you want to trade for a near-term one, we got the NBA Rising Stars All-Star Weekend rosters, and Scoot is one of a handful of G Leaguers who are going to be playing.
He played last year, didn't he?
No, not in the All-Star game. Or not in the. Did he play in the Rising Stars game last year?
I feel like I've seen a photo of him standing beside Scotty Barnes.
Maybe.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll investigate this during the break. But for now,
you know how it is when in my current existence.
Yeah.
You know how it is when it's NBA All-Star break. Just I'm a hockey guy. Then.
Oh right, yeah. I forgot you're a hockey guy.
Juggling. I'm
Can't wait for your thoughts on
fisting trade deadlines right now.
Can't wait to hear your riveting thoughts on someone named Bo Horvat. But anyway, we're gonna take a break. You've been listening to the Raptors Show on the Sportsnet Radio Network. When we come back, actual hoop talk. Welcome back to the Raptors Show on the Sportsnet Radio Network. I'm your host, William Liu. Continue to be joined by Blake Murphy. And, actual basketball talk now, because the Raptors played tough against the Phoenix Suns last night, but ultimately lost. They lost by a score of 114 to 106. Some intentional fouling at the end there kind of extended the score, but it was, a one-possession game on the road in the final minutes. Raptors couldn't really get it done. Phoenix with some more clutch plays on the Raptors, most notably that tip out to Chris Paul for 3 in a 1-point game after the Raptors got the initial stop, and then Ayton, who had a putback dunk as well on the next possession. A couple things I think to notice from that game. For me, Pascal being, I don't know, he just looks gassed to me. He looks really, really tired. And
are you surprised?
I am not surprised, because these are some of the numbers, okay? So, obviously, he had the groin injury, which kept him out for, I believe, for 11 games. When he came back from the injury, there was a minutes restriction. Obviously, that kind of went out the window. So, essentially, since that minutes restriction has sort of been tossed out, let's just say, in that 27 games during that time, he's averaging 39.4 minutes per game. He has played 40-plus minutes 11 times. This is in the last, 2 months. 40-plus minutes 11 times. I think right now we're starting to really see a lot of games where it just looks like his legs are jelly. I mean, since the Raptors beat the Hornets twice, which truthfully were fairly easy games, especially when you watched it. Siakam is shooting 44% from the field, 20% from three. He's averaging less free throw attempts per game as compared to his season average, and is shooting 72% on the line, which is lower than where he's at. So, yeah, it just seems to me like, it turns out if you play a guy 40 minutes a game every night, he might get tired.
Yep.
That's it? Okay.
No, I'm trying to
other concern is what I'm trying to say, right? It just looks like he's tired of me.
Yeah, it does. And that we know how that affects a jump shot, right? Like you don't have your legs under you later in a game, especially when Pascal, a lot of his 3-point diet is pull up stuff at the top of the floor. You participated in the Raptors Republic 3-on-3 tournament on the weekend. I know I have reporting that, you had tired legs by the end of that tournament. Your jump shot wasn't looking all that great. You weren't finishing at the rim as strongly. So, I don't know.
It's tough.
By the way, sorry to derail this coverage. I heard there were Division II ballers out at the tournament this time.
I'm not even kidding.
We're far cry from Simu and me teaming up.
Yeah, no, I wish it was still
Looks
that.
Looks like a bad Marvel cutscene.
My team, first off, in some of those previous tournaments, would have absolutely ran the table, okay? Because we got a guy named Vlad. Shout out to Vlad. But he's 6'6", 6'7".
Nah, that's not a real name. I just
what,
so
Vlad? How's Vlad not a real name?
What did you say his full name was?
His name's Vlad. I actually don't know his last name, but it doesn't really matter to me because he's a pure hooper, 6'7", two-handing, dunking the ball, right? Scoring at the three as well, rebounding, playing defense as well. To be honest, the rest of us on the team kind of sold. I mean, Drew was pretty good. He knocked down 5-6 threes, as he always does. But I was never going to contribute that much in the first place, including in a game where we lost in the finals. Well, not in the finals, in the semifinals, where I saw the lane open, took it strong to the basket, got fouled, and it was a shooting foul, so I'm shooting for one. It was a tie game with literally a minute left, and the one thing I do well is shoot free throws, and I shot it long. And yeah, eventually we lost that game and we got bounced. But it was good because if we had gone to the finals, we would have just been destroyed. There was a guy on that team. I'm not even kidding. I would love to see him play Malachi Flynn one-on-one. I would love to see it because the last time I saw somebody score to that degree with that level of ease at Mattamy was Malachi back in the summertime. So similar build too, let's just say. A Peyton Pritchard clone.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, Peyton Pritchard, another guy. Oh, he wants a bigger role. Call the press.
Yeah. You can have it here.
Young guy thinks he could do more. Anyway, the Pascal stuff. No,
Yeah,
I'm not surprised that he's tired. I'm not surprised that he's wearing down in games a little bit or over the course of the season. I think he'll bounce back from it. Like we've seen these little lulls before. I don't think it's unique to Pascal. I just think the minutes that are asked of these guys are a little on the extreme side. So, it's disappointing. It sucks. It really highlights how much this team needs Pascal to be Pascal, and B, how much even one absence like OG has this huge ripple effect where there's just look at the minutes distribution last night. And let's say Pascal came to the bench at the end of the third and was like, Man, I'm gassed. I don't have 38 minutes in me tonight. Can I get an extra breather?
Can I get one extra minute, Nick, please? I actually imagine how these conversations go.
Thad Young, Wancho, Koloko, Flynn. Like Boucher was a monster on the glass last night, so we won't include him in that. But like, which one of those guys do you want taking the minutes, right? Like, or which one of those guys, if you're Nick, are you trusting with the minutes? Again, we can get into the chicken or egg thing of, well, maybe if they played more minutes over the course of the year, they'd be more ready for them now. We can't really reset that. But yeah, this is why some of the framing of the OG stuff really frustrates me, where this team's problem for a couple of seasons now has been like, they don't have enough good players. They have good players, just not enough of them. And then like Precious has 3 good games in a row, or Gary Trent gets back from injury and Fred starts shooting well. And then it's like, well, someone's got to go. There are too many mouths to feed. It's like, no, like if you had 6 guys and that's all you trusted, if you went Nick Nurse playoff style rotation, that's still 40 minutes a night for each of those guys. Like there are a lot of minutes. There's 240 minutes to soak up here. You can have more than 5 good players.
That's the problem. Like that's why the Raptors lost last night.
But
more
you
than
see
anything
it
else.
as soon as Precious has a couple good games and everyone's healthy, then the conversation turns to, well, should someone else start? And yeah, I've been guilty of that with the Gary Trent thing, but I think it's just because Gary Trent would really help the bench. It's not really about like, oh, too many mouths to feed. You have too many good players. No, it's quite the opposite. You don't have enough guys on the bench. Anyway, not all that surprised that Pascal is wearing down a little bit. I think, if there's an area that I'm most noticing it on a night like last night, it's not even that he had only 19 points, is that he had none of the extras, right? He wasn't at the free throw line. He wasn't a factor on the glass. He wasn't really a playmaker. Yeah, that's really rare for him.
That has got to be a season low. One assist.
Yeah, I would imagine so.
And it wasn't like he wasn't like looking to pass. It wasn't like he was only taking shots. It was more that he wasn't initiating as many drives as you normally see him in the middle of the floor or from the top of the floor, and that usually leads to those kickouts or anything like that. Also, he gets a lot of assists in transition. The Raptors weren't able to get on the break that much either last night. So whatever. Pascal wasn't able to carry, but Fred stepped up. Scotty was good. Precious was good. Chris was decent. Gary was good. The start of the fourth quarter, the Raptors had trailed by, I think, 8 points at halftime. They come out firing with a 10-0 run to take the lead, and then they sort of trade back and forth. They have a 2-point lead going into fourth quarter. What is going to be the lineup you put out there? And Chris Paul had to rest because he played like most of the third quarter. Nick Nurse decides to put out Malachi, Wancho, Thad Young, Chris Boucher, along with Scotty Barnes. And that group, to me, just even watching it, I had no confidence in it. And, it's not like they got blown out. In fact, even Malachi tossed in 2 threes, or Thad Young got a little putback layup here or there. And it's just like, okay, maybe it's okay. But to me, it just felt very much like, man, you go from the intensity and the push that they made in the third quarter to make the comeback to that was just such like a deflating moment for me watching it. Did you like that decision?
No, I didn't really. And this is something that came up. What game was it? I want to say it was the Nets game when Kyrie and KD sat at the same time. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was a Sixers game with Harden and Embiid. Anyway, there was a game not that long ago where both top guys on the other team sat at the same time, and the Raptors countered by going with a no Fred, no Pascal. And I think it was the last Sixers game. I apologize if that's not right. But again, what you're trying to decide in those moments is our better chance to win to take advantage of these moments where we could have the better lineup on the floor and then survive it when we have the worst lineup on the floor? Or do we try to play the whole quarter even? And I don't think the Raptors are good enough to go with the play the whole quarter even. Like the 2018-2019 version of this team, sure, you could go with a 4-guy bench unit, go with Kyle in the bench, go with a whole bench mob if you really wanted, because the team was good enough that if you lost that bench stretch by 2 points or you played it even, like your main group was so effective that you would believe that they could make it up. This group isn't that. Like this starting 5, pick your combination of the starting 5 guys. It hasn't been terrible, but it hasn't been like, oh yeah, these guys win their minutes every single time resoundingly. Like you're not good enough in the my best 5 versus your best 5 times to punt those little windows of advantage. Right. And I don't know, it gets complicated because then you're getting into you know, what do you do for a lineup? Like, say you start that quarter with Pascal and Fred out there.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do when one of those guys needs a break and Chris Paul's back on the floor?
Well, this is why you needed to stagger more minutes earlier in the third quarter, because both Phoenix and Toronto extended their starters heavily in the third quarter. For Toronto, that's not a rare sight. For Phoenix, probably more so. But yeah, I mean, like I think where I would have to say, if you were Nick Nurse and you're looking at that bench, and even if Pascal or Fred come to you and they say, look, listen, I just need like 2-3 minutes here. What can you buy me with, right? And like, look at the bench options that you had last night. First off, the Raptors I'm pretty sure they're carrying 14, right, in terms of the actual roster spots, because Joe Wieskamp second 10 days expired. So you're literally one player short already, just based on just what you're designing.
And I mean, you could call it 13 because Otto.
Yeah, so Otto, so you're down to 13 because Otto is not a contributor at all this season. There are certain players on this team that you just can't play in under any circumstances, like a Kem Birch, right? You have players that probably aren't ready to play in most circumstances, like Christian Coloco, because they're just put him down in the G League, brought him back for this road trip midway through. And
he's going to go back down momentarily anyway. I think.
So what are we doing?
And
we're just polluting the planet for no reason for a 2-minute performance here. We got Malachi Flynn, who I honestly, you know, he got 5 threes up in 7 minutes and made 2. So you might even say, okay, it wasn't so bad, but like most scenarios, you're not going to play him. You're not going to play Delano Banton. He was available to play yesterday, but he wasn't able to play or get into the game. Jeff Doughton wasn't really used. Ron Harper Jr. is not a guy that we've seen used in any sort of meaningful context. What are some of his options here? You know what I mean? And that's where, if you're Nick, I'm sure he's got frustrations with the front office in the sense that, like, what are you giving me here to work with? Right? Okay, you don't want me to extend my players 40 minutes. Anybody with a brain could tell you that you shouldn't play your best players that many minutes because they will wear down. Like, no one's surprised. I'm sure Nick's not like, oh my God, I'm shocked that Pascal is wearing down here because I'm playing him 40 minutes a night. But who are the alternatives? And if the directive is you got to win, then the front office got to supply you to win. You can't, you know, make chicken salad, essentially.
And we don't know what the conversations are like when they make these end of roster decisions and how much Nick has the input, how much is just front office, top down, whatever. But it is pretty striking when you look across the court and the guys winning those minutes for Phoenix are Saben Lee, who's on his, I think, 4th 10-day contract of the year from the 905.
Right.
You have an open roster spot. That guy is in your system, and he's beating your bench unit. And Ish Wainwright, who, he hasn't like lit the NBA on fire, but
he's playable.
The Raptors are paying him right now. They gave him 2 years of partial guarantee. That's how high they were on him, and then they went another route with that. And
the other route, by the way, Isak Bonga, who is now playing for Bayern Munich.
Yeah, and Sam Decker, who just won the British Basketball League MVP.
Okay, that's a fun bit of trivia.
Now, if these things haven't happened in the opposite order, if Sam Decker was coming into camp as a BBL MVP, you know he's making that team.
All right.
Someone to trade BBL stories with Nick. They got to change the initials of that league, by the way.
I
like
agree.
Sam Decker being called the BBL MVP is okay.
That's Kyle. I'm pretty sure that's Kyle Larry. Anyway,
one last thing on the depth thing. So I just pulled some numbers.
What about campaign as well? Like, literally, the whole Phoenix Suns team is
in their defense, campaign, the camp that, and you were there in Quebec City.
I remember.
I can't remember in all the camps I've been to and exhibition games and stuff, hearing more about how out of place a player looked. Like he had to do that.
Right.
He went to China and then the G League and then only got an opportunity because the Suns didn't have enough players for the relaunch in the bubble. So like that one, I don't blame them for as much, but like every good 905 game this year has been because Saben Lee and Jeff Doughton were really good. And neither of those guys, I don't know. Saben Lee's not saving the season. He's not changing anything, but it's a multi-year pattern of this now. And the numbers I pulled, and I know we're running out of time, so I apologize, but since the run it back year, 4 seasons, I pulled the numbers on how many times teams have played players 38 minutes or more in a game. The Raptors have done it 432 times over 4 seasons. If you don't think that's a lot,
oh man,
nobody else has 300.
Oh,
and the Raptors are at 432. So I understand the like game to game, hey, what do you expect them to do? Like they're trying to win this game. And I also understand people being like, well, what's the difference between 38 and 36 minutes really? The Raptors have played their guys 38 minutes or more 47% more often than the next highest team over the last 4 years. Like there's no team that operates as every moment matters and we have to win every minute. And this includes the Tampa tank season. I didn't even take that out of the sample.
Damn.
If I took that out of the sample, it probably gets even more extreme. Because guess what they didn't do as much of that year? Play guys 38 minutes because they wanted to lose.
Well, the common issue is that they just don't have that kind of depth. But the thing is,
The bench mob feels 20 years ago.
Yeah. No, every time I call CJ, I'm like, yo, can you still play for the team?
Yeah.
So.
No, he's too busy making new music, it looks like, from his Instagram teases.
All right.
You got to get him to debut a track on the Raptor Show with Will.
He got to feature Alex with it because I know Alex hasn't rapped this season. That's part of the vibes being down. No, but seriously, though, they haven't really developed some of the players that they've even brought in. And that's where the front office can say, well, look, hey, look at what Utah's doing for Brooklyn. Look at what, what are your
O'Shea.
O'Shea, other pieces like Terrence Davis, I suppose that's a different scenario. But even some of the even an Ish Smith or Ish Wainwright, stuff like that. I mean, these are minor things, but ultimately they do add up.
Ish Wainwright uses Ish Smith as a kettlebell. That's a big difference in Ish.
Bro, he really is built like a Geo dude. Anyway, we're done for today. I've been your host, Willow, and you've been listening to the Raptors Show on the Sportsnet Radio Network. Make sure you find the Raptors Show wherever you listen to podcasts and subscribe, and please review the show. Reminder, we're streaming live on Sportsnet's YouTube channel and airing live on Sportsnet 360 Monday to Friday from 2 to 3 p.m. Thanks again to Blake Murphy, our board producer, Derek Randale. Shout out to Lance Kennedy for the assist as well, and Jennifer Olnick for helping us with the YouTube stream. And I'll be back to talk to you tomorrow.